The Marshall Podcast.
Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the Marshall Podcast, episode number 3. My name is Daniel P. Carter and I will be hosting this. So the guest on this one is Brian Poole of Brian Poole and The Tremeloes, formerly The Tremeloes, who were a beat band from the 60s in the UK. The band had a number of hits, put out a load of records on Decca and toured the world. And the way that relates to Marshall and this podcast is that Brian was a close friend of Jim Marshall, and he talks in this podcast about when he would go and hang out at the shop that Jim had, which became like something of a hub for the music scene in the UK in the late 50s and early 60s. I hope you enjoy this one. It's kind of different from the first two that we've had so far, but I would go as far as to say that this is one of my favourite podcasts I've ever recorded, be that for Marshall or for my own podcast, Someone Who Isn't Me. Brian is a lovely bloke, and we had an incredible conversation, and it was, not only did I get an insight into the early days of Marshall from the shop and to when actual Marshall amps was formed, I also felt like I got a glimpse in on the British music scene in that era, and there's a few revelations in there that I found really interesting. He has a few theories about things that transpired in the music industry at that point, and it made a lot of sense. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I did recording it. As I was going back through this, just kind of editing the audio levels and whatnot, it just made me realise how much I enjoyed that conversation. It was brilliant. So, Marshall Podcast, episode number 3, Brian Poole. Enjoy. The Marshall story, you know, it goes way back, and it's obviously the brand is so legendary now is because it's built its way up, and that's why we're talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it started with rock and roll.
Yeah.
Proper rock and roll.
Yeah.
You know, gradually as the music sort of went and got heavier, then Marshall amps changed.
Yeah.
You know, in the very early days when I used to go to Jim's shop with the Tremeloes.
Yeah.
We were not the only ones that went in there. There was Pete Townsend. There were, Big Jim Sullivan, all the important players of the time, all congregated around Jim's shop. And the reason for that, though, was because he, in the early days, was a drummer.
Yeah.
He was a professional drummer. So he could make us, we'd go in there if we had a gig maybe over at Uxbridge, Burton's at Uxbridge, and we'd say to him, we've got so-and-so broken on the drums. There was nowhere you could buy a part like what they call a clutch.
Yeah. You
could not buy that just like, you know, out of thin air. So we used to go into Jim and he would say, you're playing tonight. I'll try and get you one done in a couple of hours.
Wow.
Come back, or have a cup of tea, you know.
What, Mrs. Marshall would make us a cup
of tea. Yeah, he would actually go, in his home, he had, and out the back in his shop, had lathes. So he could put a bit of metal, and he had loads of stuff. Yeah. Drums all round before he had guitars and amplifiers, there were just drums all round the big bass drums all round the walls. So he could always lay his hand on a bit of something to make you what you wanted.
Wow.
And that's how we sort of got our started. Him being a drum teacher as well, that's how everybody kind of met him. All the bands wanted to know, about the drumming, and some of the drummers, he taught some famous people. John Bonham, not John Bonham, he did, sorry, I've got that wrong, my memory skips, but he used to teach a lot of the people that have turned into really good rock drummers over the years.
It's funny, isn't it? Because I think most people probably just assume that his
he
influence...
made amplifiers.
Yeah, and that was his influence on music, which can't be sniffed at, let's face it, because it wasn't until those amps came around, which changed the sound of music, which is unbelievable. But to hear that side of it as well,
I always say there was a time when that actually happened, the change in the amplifiers, which made the change in British music. Pete Townsend said to him, amongst loads of people, Pete was trying out an amp, and he said, Jim, couldn't you make something with more, what can I call it? Yeah, grunt. He said, can you make something with grunt? And that became a word. Everyone said it. Said, is that, if the amp's got grunt, we'll have that one, you know. And it was that, to me, was probably the time when that changed. Old Pete didn't well, he probably does now.
Yeah.
I don't think he realised he totally changed music in those days.
Yeah.
We had a little hand in one of the changes that came about. The amplifier, the 4x4s, always had 4 speakers facing outwards, straight.
Yeah.
And he came to see us, and it was at the time when, I don't know why, but they did, because we weren't all good-looking blokes or anything, but all that screaming and stuff started.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was so loud that you couldn't hear what you did at all.
Yeah. And
audiences in those days were a little bit closer than they have them now.
Yeah.
So we said, well, our sound is getting lost in going straight forward. How about making one with 2 facing upwards? Stand it behind us, we'll hear the bit there, and we'll be able to hear the 2 top ones. There's several of them sitting all round us now today. And Jim actually reminded me of that 20 odd years ago. And he said, did you realise that it was those few words that that you and the Tremeloes said that made me make those amps?
Wow.
The next gig that we did, he turned up with Ken Brown. He turned up to our gig. It was at Woodward Hall, and it was in Dagenham.
Yeah.
And we were just playing rock and roll, because that's all we had in those days. We weren't a harmony band then. We turned into a harmony band later, but when we sort of smoothed out a bit. We just played rock and roll, and it was needed, and he brought it down, and we tried it out, and we used it, and it just took off like mad.
Wow.
It's just sound. We used to we had like Selma amplifiers before Jim made, that's a story as well. Before Jim made his amplifiers, he was all drums and an amp or a guitar here and there, you know. And he started making amplifiers. People said to him, we're playing through these little amps at Selma. We had little Vox 10, little, you know, small amps. How about making an amplifier, Jim? Do you reckon? You know? And he'd ages afterwards, he said, well, you know, it's not that easy. You've got to have a supply of valves and all the stuff. It was all valves then. Supply of valves and all the stuff. Little later, he came and said to us, we're going to make amps now. We're starting and we're going to carry on with the amps now. And of course, everybody came to the shop then. And that was at Uxbridge Road. And
so it must have been a hub for the entire music scene that's got this huge, massive legacy, these legendary artists.
Yeah, it was. They weren't all famous then, obviously. No, we didn't have a hit record. Nobody had hit records. There was The Who. I don't think they were called The Who when they first came in. But Pete and all the boys, they used to come in. There was Jim Sullivan, one of the most famous guitar players. All the older people now, you know. Even a guy that you came in that shop that I was really surprised to see was a folk singer. I'll remember it in a minute.
Yeah.
And everybody was
not
catered
Nick Drake,
for.
was it?
No, it was. He's quite a famous guitar player.
Okay.
I'll remember it in a minute. But all those people were sort of in the shop having a cup of tea, talking about the gig that they were going to go and do. Talking about everything. You learnt from everybody at the time.
Yeah.
I mean, we weren't one of the best bands by any means in those days, but nor were Pete and the boys, nor were anybody. You know. But
who do guess though that you would all go on to have these careers that were so phenomenal? Yeah. It's funny, isn't it?
Yeah, it is quite weird. We had a good.
What do you think it was then about that sort of whole period of time then, and all the people that were all playing in bands together and playing shows together? What do you think made it so special?
Before we started doing shows together. It was just one night, and we were always on our own, and somebody else would be playing along the road. We always hated it if someone like Screaming Lord Sutch was playing, because everybody would go and see Sutchy.
Yeah.
And nobody came to see us. And people like that. Zoot Money had a great band. Gino, now there's a story, because Gino we met, we used to do American bases.
Okay.
Air Force bases. There were 50 of them, I think, in England at the time, and 20 odd of them were around the Lincolnshire and the south, and like Bryce Norton, Mildenhall, Alconbury, loads and loads of them. We met Gino. He was on with us one night. And his band were all American servicemen of the camp where we were playing. I think it was a place called Bentwaters near London.
Okay.
Oh, nearer than all the others anyway.
Yeah.
And we met Gino, and that was a story. Suddenly, you know, sort of 20 years later, when everything had all calmed down and the bases apparently were all closing, Gino became a really popular act, and it was all, they weren't all American guys then, because some went back.
Yeah.
Gino was here doing, tearing apart, you know. You couldn't play within a couple of miles of Gino, because you'd get no one there.
Yeah.
They all go to see Gino. Yeah. And we would if we could as well.
So you tore the bases and played to the servicemen, or were people allowed on the bases as well for those shows? Or
yes, yeah, they were. I was talking to my wife about that yesterday. We were saying the security wasn't. There was hardly any security.
Yeah.
We used to play out all the bases. We would drive up. They obviously knew we were coming. They'd say, yeah, you go over there, set up in there, the officers' club or the NCO's club or the whatever it might be, the private club. And we just used to go and set up. There was nothing. But 3 or 4 times when we were doing those, over those years, there were alerts. Nuclear alerts, and what they did then, they just left us on the base, and there must have been in these places, they were big as well, big sort of clubs, and they left us and all the women that had come in to the base to see, to be with the blokes. Most of them were, married to the servicemen as well. And they used to, and we couldn't play. Everything was turned off, and they just had sort of candlelight and stuff. But that happened 2 or 3 times, and that was nuclear alerts.
And what? So that's the end of the night, done.
Yeah, well, we used to play a little bit, sort of no electric.
Yeah.
So we'd play a little bit acoustic or something, and just do as best we could, and then couldn't have a drink or anything because, well, we weren't allowed to drink. We were only about 17, 18 years old, know. So it was quite. The security just wasn't the same. we used to play at a place in London. In those days, we were picked by the forces, by the Air Force, to play at a place called Douglas House in London, on the embankment somewhere, and it was the American embassy or part of it, and we used to go in there. Just walk in, park outside, walk in, put out all our stuff out. There'd be people helping us and around us.
Yeah.
And one day we asked about the guys standing there. They had these big jackets, like evening jackets, and they helped us. They did everything, and they were around us all the time. Even when we were playing, these guys were sort of around us. And we asked one time, who are they? What do they do? And one of the blokes said, oh, they're called Master at Arms. They said under those coats they've got guns, everything.
Wow. And
they're totally armed up to the teeth. So you didn't see it, but it was there probably.
Yeah.
That's the point, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a different time.
Yeah, and the other thing, people say, why did the American invasion of rock and roll music happen? British rock and roll music in the States.
Yeah. Now
I've told you that, it
makes a bit
kind of makes sense. We were playing to 18-year-old young blokes.
Yeah.
And all of them did the time and then went back. So they knew all the bands that had been there working. And if they liked a particular band, they would obviously say, talk about it in the States. And I always reckon that's why the British invasion happened. It was...
Those seeds had already been
5 years later, well, 10 years later maybe.
Yeah.
But they'd already seen all the bands.
That's really interesting.
And remember, there were 20, 30, 50, 100 bases, Air Force places in this country. So, yeah,
that's
a lot of young guys,
That's funny. Yeah, I bet that aspect of it never even gets talked about normally.
No, it doesn't. And I've been thinking about that, whether to bring that up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it doesn't seem relevant when you're talking about other stuff, but that, those times, and Jim, the funny thing is, Jim Marshall used to come to one or two of those bases.
Yeah.
Have a listen to us, have a listen to other bands and everything. And he used to be out walking out just like we did. And so Jim...
Wow.
I've got to say, Jim, I knew Jim from when I was 18 years old, and he wasn't much older.
Well, you grew up in the East End, right?
Yeah. I was born in Stepney.
Yeah.
And I lived in Barking.
Yeah.
And, well, that was posh. Then I was supposed to be posh.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I was at East End. Yeah. We all were. All the Tremeloes are East End boys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, East End in Essex, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I live out in Essex.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, to go into London as well, to Jim's shop, for instance, we used to drive from our house to Jim's in about 20 minutes, half an hour.
Yeah, you won't do that now.
Yeah. Couldn't even get to the end of the road in 20 minutes.
Wow. So,
but we spent all the time that we weren't working in the early days with people in Jim's shop, that early shop.
So what sort of time was this then?
I would say 1960, from 1962 to about 1966, 7. Yeah.
Decca picked you up, when was that? That was like 63?
Decca picked us up in 60.
Was it
61 or two, it might have been 60.
Oh, okay.
But when we were first picked up for Decca, we didn't do any of our own records.
Yeah.
We backed vocally. We backed Tommy Steele. We backed quite a lot of Decca people that were coming up. Jimmy Powell, blues people. We even backed some of the Americans, Clyde McPhatter. Lots of famous Americans came in.
So how was that being that band to do that?
Well, we were a three-piece vocal. See, we did a lot of Buddy Holly stuff. So if you did Buddy Holly stuff, one sung the main melody, one sung slightly over, a third and a fifth.
Yeah.
So we could do that with nearly everything. Christmas carols, we just go to parties and sing always in that same harmony. So they asked us eventually to come into Decca at West Hampstead, and I went back there the other day. That was fantastic. It's still there. And back these lots of other people, and you work, which is fantastic because you work with people like the blues players like Cyril Davis, the really famous guitar players, Eric Clapton, Jim Sullivan, all the really famous players. Some of them you wouldn't know the names of, but were brass players and everything. And so we were the vocal group.
Yeah.
And you know what? We couldn't read music, so they used to write it especially for us.
Yeah.
And people like, I often see on Facebook he was young then, bloke called Charles Blackwell, and he had the Charles Blackwell Orchestra, and that was one of the Decca orchestras.
Yeah.
And Charlie taught us how to read this special sheets, so we could do it with any song.
Yeah.
And it was.
How was that as a time then? Because I presume you would just get called in and work with an artist, and how much time would you have to work with them? Would it just be like, right, this is the song, we're going to go through it a couple of times and then record it? Or?
Yeah. Most times you'd be given a song at Decca.
Yeah.
And they would say, you got a session on so and so, and we used to get £8. I can't remember, £8 a session, which was 4 hours, or it might have been £8 for a whole day. I can't remember now.
Yeah.
But
between the three of you.
No, we got £8 each, which was so good. It was okay. And so they give us a record of it, a tape. Usually a little reel in those days.
Yeah.
And they'd give us that. We'd listen to it, learn the 3-part harmony, and then go to the studio. And the orchestra, there'd be about 10, 15, 20 if you were doing something like well, Tommy Steele, we only did one or two of his, but massive orchestration, and we were in that, just part of the orchestra.
Yeah.
And it was really good to work on that, because now people write things about these old sessions and stuff.
Yeah.
And I actually know, and I can actually say, no, my friend Clem Catini, for instance, one of the best drummers that ever lives.
Yeah.
He must have, Clem must have played on 20 number ones and, you know, all 60s, 70s and 80s. Yeah. And he often writes to me and says, somebody said so-and-so, or somebody was at this session, you know. Did that happen, or what, you know?
Yeah.
Did I play on that? And I can remember usually, and he remembers too. I mean, he's quite old now, you know. But it's really good, because you get to do the proper work.
Yeah.
Feel more proud of doing that work than you do of going on and playing the hit records.
Why is that?
Well, because you do that all the time. And you don't work, you only work with 5 blokes who you know.
Yeah. And
you've rehearsed with. And that's all fine, it's easy. But you go into a studio and work with, I mean, really famous people. You know, guitar players, everybody, other singers. I mean, singers that they bring in to do little bits and everything.
Yeah.
Ever so famous people, like French people, like we're talking some of the French singers, they bring it over anyway, and Americans. I listened to a record we did the other day. It's by Delbert McClinton, and Delbert is a really big blues artist now in the States.
Yeah.
You would never think that he came over and sung this silly song.
Yeah.
It was called the Hully Gully, just a dance, and played harmonica on it. And he's a massive star now, so it's lovely, because I was there, you know. I remember him singing that, you know.
So when did the transition go from? Were you still doing those kind of sessions when you were doing the band as well?
No, we yes, we were for a while. When we were doing the basses, the American basses, because we didn't have any hits then, it just overlapped a little bit. So sometimes we were doing the basses and doing a session in, you know, during that week or something, you know. So we used to, after that though, I mean, as soon as we had a hit, it was everything changed.
Yeah.
How so? We didn't do any of that. Everything changed. For some reason, we suddenly got really popular. Everyone wanted to touch us and all that stuff. It was unbelievable in those days. It wasn't like now, where you can't get near these people. They used to get near.
Yeah.
Sometimes you'd have beautiful clothes, you know, and they'd just rip them off. I'll have a bit of that, you know. And honestly, that's the way it was in those days.
How did that feel when that first started happening? Did you? Because I think if you're you know, if you're a bunch of working class lads from the East End, and all of a sudden you
goes to your head a bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It does. It goes to your head a bit, and you think that it's going to be like that forever.
Yeah.
And it's like that for a few years, and then suddenly other people are coming up and taking over.
Yeah.
You know, and that's hard to cope with.
Yeah, I think so as well. I've been
and even more hard to cope with. And a few of my friends committed suicide.
Yeah.
Which is, I don't like to think. it unnecessary. But like Del Shannon, for instance, I mean, we used to back Del. Suddenly he wasn't so famous anymore, and it went to his head. He didn't want to live anymore, you know. With us it was slightly different, because we'd come from you know, we were slightly different. We weren't the best looking bunch of blokes for a start. We were all pretty big, and so we were okay. We could sort of punch through that. But
it's tough though, isn't it?
Yeah, very. And that's another thing that I often talk to my daughters about. My daughters are both in, well, they were a band called Alicia's Attic, my two. And
oh wow.
But it was advice, well, that we tried to give them, to say, look, don't just make that your thing, Alicia's Attic. They got signed, they had £1 million this, £1 million that, you know, and they did ever so well. But then they wrote a song, and So Solid Crew used it, and it's still played as an anthem these days. I can't think. Oh, now is that the one? Well, one of them's called Lola's Theme. And they wrote it, and it was a you know, big sort of famous thing, and they earned really good money suddenly. And they were writers.
And that PRS keeps coming, doesn't it? And it's that's like free money in a sense, that you kind of forget about it, and it just comes in the mail every so often and ticks over. It's nice.
That's right. And they've written, I mean, their biggest writing time was with Kylie. They did a lot of Kylie's hits. And the bands, the girl bands, Atomic Kitten and all that lot. They wrote lots of stuff. And America as well, they did some stuff with Janet Jackson. Janet Jackson had a #1 with one of Shelley's songs.
Wow. And do you think that your career as a musician, well, it clearly had an effect on them? They clearly must have, because I think the thing with a lot of people now is the idea of playing in a band feels like an unobtainable thing, doesn't it? To be a musician, and it has got harder, I think.
It has got harder as well, because
I mean, not that it was ever easy, but it's
the old thing. People seem to think that people like Simon Cowell can make them a star without having the talent to do it. But in our day, there was no Simon Cowell. You know, there was someone like Carol Levis Discoveries or something that nobody, you know, that was jugglers and people. You know, so you didn't have any of that in our day. And so later, it was easier to take when we weren't famous anymore. You know, because we always thought it was a bit of a laugh, you know. What we used to actually play with it as well. If the audience were all screaming and going mad, when we got one of the lads, Chip Hawkes, he came into the band, and we just used to push him right to the front and stand over the back and play. And they loved it. People loved it. But kind of easier for us. I didn't feel like committing suicide. I was quite pleased when it all slowed down a bit. And then, of course, you get the nostalgia tours that, well,
how do you feel about those?
For the last 20 or probably more, 30 years. And that's quite amazing. That's lovely to do. And they always put together people like, the last one that I did last year was Jerry and the Pacemakers, was PJ Proby, and the Fortunes, the Searchers, and us, Brian Poole and the Tremeloes. We had turns of calling it either the Tremeloes or Brian Poole and the Tremeloes, whichever they, thought. But those have been great to do, and I kind of retired from that last year.
Yeah.
But then that same tour company came on to us and came on to me and said, look, we're going to bring Peter Noon from Herman's Hermits, and we've got Dave Berry, he wants to do it, which is, Dave goes back a long way with me as well. Do you want to do this with Vanity Fair? And Vanity Fair, great band. They not only got hit, they're good rock band as well, good keyboards and big rocky keyboards and everything.
Yeah.
And so you can't, how can you say no to that?
Yeah.
They said, everything they did, all the stuff we wanted, and it's going to be a lovely tour. We'll enjoy it.
And it must be very different touring to back in the day. I don't mean the stuff like touring the bases and stuff, but when the band was touring, I mean, you must have toured the world, and it was.
Yeah, we did. We were lucky. We had our hits were hits in sort of 20 countries at a time, so we could do a world tour every time we had a record out, and they used to make sure we did that as well.
You said before we started that you got worked.
Oh yeah, we were banging away on tours for years, and it was okay. It was good, and we were all married and everything in between those things, and then when children came, that's when the things change a bit. As soon as children came along, for all of us, there's only there's 1, 2, 3. There's 3 of the guys still, 4 of them still left, and they're the same exactly as me. When children came along, you take a back seat and you just do what you've got to do with the children rather than think of show business. Yeah, show business goes on the back burner.
Yeah, For me, it was tough because I used to play in a band, and we did all right for a minute as well. And it when my son came along, I was in that point where things were really starting to. But it was a weird one. It's like you're always thinking, oh, if we do this, and if this happens, and then we'll get to here, and then this will happen. And that's my biggest regret, I think.
Yeah.
Because, when they're growing up, they change so quickly, don't they?
Yeah.
You go away on tour for 2 weeks, and I'd come back and I'd be like, who's this?
You need to be there. Yeah. And all of us had that sort of that thing. We did tour again, but we didn't work quite as much. Yeah. Because in our, if you go, heyday, I've got to say it, not a word I like.
Yeah, but everybody had, in that period where you were really up there.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Yeah. You just had to take everything that came. Because if you didn't, somebody else would,
yeah.
And I've always said, we weren't the best band around. We weren't the bee's knees of all the bands, I can name a few that were, but we were because we worked all the time, we became more liked, than we probably should have been,
I don't know about that, but yeah.
And we like I always said, we weren't the best, so we changed it as well. We decided, because we'd done so well at vocal harmony, we changed everything and made ourselves a vocal group. And we had to find, that's again where Jim and Terry Marshall came in.
Yeah.
Jim and Terry, I don't know, 70s time. We needed ways of having a microphone like on the drums, because our drummer was a good singer.
Yeah.
So, and a microphone on everything. And this is quite early days when we were thinking of doing it, but we hadn't done it to make ourselves vocal. So everything had to come out of everywhere. You know, all the sound had to come out of every cabinet, all of it. Yeah. That's what we wanted. And they built us a thing. We used to call it not the combo, the pod. The pod, it was. That we used to call it the pod. They built us this thing that had all the volumes and tone controls on for everything that we had on stage. And so we could just get those right and then go and sing, and you had this massive sound, vocal sound mainly, coming out. And that was another thing. You see, they were into, you know, sounds, and although Jim Marshall was a musician above all, really. Yeah. And what I never realised for quite a few years, so was Terry, his son. Yeah. Terry played in a band who we used to work with all the time. They were a big band with brass and, you know, what we called a big band, about probably 8-piece or 10-piece, you know. And he played in a band called the Flea Wreckers, which was a fantastic band. And another one as well. And we didn't realise that. And I didn't realise till I used to meet him with Jim, just going out for a day or something, or just, you know, because we're fairly close, we would go. His house was, I could walk to his house from my house. Yeah. And I used to occasionally, you know. And I didn't realise till those days later with Jim that Terry was a musician as well. Yeah. And a fantastic musician.
What did he play?
He plays sax, tenor. Oh, okay. I think he plays both. I've heard him play baritone, and I've heard him play tenor. I haven't heard him play the little one, alto, but I've heard him play mainly tenor. But he's a great player, Terry, good blues player. Yeah, you know, and you don't realise. You know, you just don't realise all those years. And,
What were some of your favourite tours back then? Like, were these, when you'd go out and do a tour like the stuff you were talking about earlier in the band, was it kind of like you were saying now, the tours where it's almost like a package tour where they'll put people together? Yeah. Was it like that then? Were you touring with big bands as well, or?
Yes. Yeah, you were. Those tours in those days mostly had somebody from America. They always had Americans like Chris Montez and Brian Hyland, lots of people, Tommy Rowe, Clive McFatter, all those people all used to come over. They were quite a lot of times they'd come over with their latest record, and they would top the bill, and we'd have bands on those tours like do you know, like that we still work with now. Searchers, one of those tours, for instance, 1964, Roy Orbison was top of the bill. I think it was Roy Orbison, Dusty Springfield, Gene Pitney, me and the Tremeloes, the Searchers, and a band called, I think they were called the Echoes, but they backed the people that didn't have a band with them, the Americans. So that, and guys, just brought this to mind. You what I'd forgotten was we all used to travel in the same coach. Yeah. One great big coach. and all travel in that. And so occasionally someone would say, like Roy Orbison, said to our Tremeloes and me one night, going somewhere, and we're all sitting on the coach, and he had a guitar out, and he said, "You're looking for a new single, aren't you?" And we said, "Yes, we are. You know, we're looking for our third hit single." And he said, "I've got one. How'd you like this?" And he played it to us on the guitar, but it was ever so bluesy, and it was a song called Candyman. And eventually we did it, but we did it how the English fans of the time would have loved. Well, it did. They made it, I think it went to 3, or, you know, it didn't go to #1, but it was high up. Yeah. And he just played it to us, and we said, "Oh, that's fantastic. We'd love to do that. Can you get a tape of it for us?" And he said, "Yeah, I'll bring a tape, get it done." He said, "It'd just be me and guitars." We said, "Yeah, fine." And he'd done it really bluesy. And he actually recorded that as well later. Or might have been before, but later anyway.
Yeah. Like the bluesy version.
Yeah, the bluesy version. And ours was like, well, you know, sort of really rock and roll version.
Yeah.
But those sort of things happened quite a lot. You would talk to somebody about music. You know, we used to have in-depth talks to Dusty Springfield, who was always lovely and sort of one of the girls, like one of the boys. Not hard to work with at all. You know, I don't know how she was later, but in those days she was really lovely. We used to have in-depth conversations with her about blues and American blues singers and everything. And she turned into also one of the best sort of blues singers around.
Wow.
So those were, you know, good days. And it all started with, we're sitting, you know, we're sitting amongst it. All started with Jim and his shop. That shop was at Hanwell, by the way. That was Hanwell.
Yeah.
And I went a little while ago, and there was a thing on called the Hanwell Hootie. And that, you see, now they're a record company, and they do everything now, Marshalls. And got a great band, by the way, who I really do like. I've got them on Facebook, I watch them, called King Creature.
Yeah.
They look like real, you know, but lovely guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they, that's another thing that they've sort of developed. All those years.
But then as you said, like, there's so much that I didn't know about, that he was, you know, helping bands out and building stuff to order and helping shape the way bands could tour, and amazing.
Yeah. And he, you see, when he first made that #1 amplifier, that they call it the fabled #1.
They've got it in the upstairs. Yeah.
Well, up there, eventually when I moved to Milton Keynes, Jim phoned me and said, "Come down to the factory and, you know, we'll have a chat and go out to dinner." So I said, "Yeah, lovely." And we went up to that amp, and it's all gold now. And he lifted it up, undone it, lifted it up, and he went, "See those solderings under there?" He said, "I think you boys must have done some of that at least." And I looked at it and I said, "Yeah, but it's all gold, Jim." He said, "No, it's all just covered, you know, covered in gold." Wow. He said, "That's the fabled #1 now." Well, I've got a picture on my phone still of Jim, me and the Tremeloes with the fabled #1, and there's no box on it.
Yeah.
It's just a chassis, just all metal and valves and a transformer. And I've always said, I used to say to him, "You sure that was the number one?" And he said, "Yeah, that one is the one that's up here." Wow. You know. So all those days, people used to even walk in and like help out, and it was a bunch of lads.
Yeah.
Got famous, but it was a bunch of lads, you know, in the first place.
Yeah.
Some great musicians. I mean, you know, when I think of who I've stood, some of the musicians that I really, you know, think are great, the guitar players. You know, I'm in awe because I think all those years ago they were doing the same as me. They're trying to find an amplifier that worked nicely for what they did, you know. And I wasn't even. I mean, I used to play guitar in those days, and I've got still got my lovely old guitars, but I didn't even play after that for like 20 years. I was sort of the front man, you know, and I wish I could play more now, but your hands, I'm 77 now, and your hands get a little bit sort of sticky. You can't sort of do it so good. Yeah. And strength as well. And I sat in Jim's shop and factory. I've met people here. I've met you as well. My God, when I say to my girls that I've met you, they'll go, "Blimey, you know, how'd you do that then, Dad?" You know. I said, "Well, the boys, you know, Alex asked me." Yeah. But you see, people don't think, do they? Don't think that this happens. Yeah. And it always did. It always happened. Yeah. You know.
Yeah, I think that's the thing. People need to be aware, don't they? Because when you're a kid and you look at, you know, if you're watching Top of the Pops back in the day, you'd always want to be that. You'd always aspire to be it, but there never felt like it was actually a thing that you could do. Like you could never achieve those things. And what people need to realise is that every part of that industry, whether it's playing in the bands, whether it's writing the songs, whether it's doing the lights at the shows, they're all done by people that are just passionate about music.
Yeah.
And they've found their way in.
Yeah, and always people that work at it. Yeah. Because like we were saying earlier, the one thing that you can't do is think that somebody like Simon Cowell's can make a star, because they ain't. Yeah. You've got to be, unless you know, do some weird thing, but you've usually got to work at it, haven't you, Dan? You've got to really work at it. Yeah. And we used to say, people would say to us over the years, how did you get famous? And we said, well, we were doing A-levels at school. There was only one way we could get ourselves famous, and that was to be going out, doing gigs and working, practicing, and still doing homework and stuff. Yeah. You had a 24-hour life, and there was only that one way that you could make it. Yeah. Unless you were supremely talented and didn't need to, like some people are.
But even those people need to be found.
And finding them, it's even harder. Yeah, because there's so many now. I think the real talent of people, they get seen now, and that's a really good thing. You know, they didn't get seen. There was nowhere to see them. The only way you could get seen was to get up in front of a band live and sing as good as you could. And that's how you got that's how we got our Decca contract. See, there's another one, Decca. We were doing by the way, I went to see Decca, the old studios.
Yeah.
It is now the British Opera Company.
Okay.
And we asked, I had a photographer from America who wanted to do a programme. And he said, could we get into that studio? So I asked. And they said, yes, you can go into the studios. We'll come and meet you and take you around and everything, but you can see everything. And I went back last year and saw the old studio where we used to work.
Same?
Studio 4.
Yeah.
No, well, it's not the same, but the shape's the same.
Yeah.
And you know the glass panels you see people looking out from over the top of a console like that? That's still there. The glass panels are still there.
Yeah.
And all the soundproofing up on the ceiling and walls is still there.
Wow.
And it's really something to see. But they're talking about Decca. When we were 18, 19 or whatever we were, and those times we'd worked and worked and worked, got people to come and see us, like yourself. Got people down and said, we're doing a gig, would you like to come?
Yeah.
And sometimes they would, sometimes they wouldn't. And we got Mike Smith down from Decca, and we were due to do our audition, and the Beatles did an audition for Decca on the same day. I think it was actually the same day.
Yeah.
And what happened was we got picked. They didn't get Decca, they didn't get the Beatles. So quite a weird thing. And, you know, people have different views on that. And I always say, well, they didn't do too badly out of us. We sold millions of records, you know.
Yeah.
So we did okay, but not as good as the Beatles would have done.
That's more than okay, though, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the Beatles
you did more than okay.
We did okay. But the Beatles, they went in and did an audition that I don't think was totally sort of suitable. I don't know why. George Martin once told me that they came in and they did an audition for him, and he turned them down as well first time because they didn't sing any of those great songs that they'd written. They sung covers of things like My Bonnie Lies Over the Ocean, all that jazz things.
Yeah.
I don't know what they're trying to do. We just went through rock and roll.
Yeah.
Us lot. But how weird that was. They turned down the Beatles and they signed us.
Wow. That's awesome.
Cool.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. That's
no problem.
That's really great.
Always good to talk. I quite enjoy it, especially these days. Like I was saying to Alex, I've been mainly doing, I've got grandchildren and everything and doing stuff like that now. Yeah. And it's nice to come out and talk about things, the real things. It's good for them. Like I said, I'm 77 now.
Yeah.
It's good for the memory too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What an incredible
brilliant
career.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay, you're very welcome. It's been a pleasure, mate.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure to sit and hear you tell it.
Yeah.
The Marshall Podcast.
Thank you so much for checking out episode 3 of the Marshall Podcast. Huge thanks to Brian for taking the time out of his day to come and do this. It was, as I said, one of my favourite podcasts I've ever recorded. He's a lovely bloke, and aside from this incredible legacy that he's had with the Tremeloes and Brian Poole and the Tremeloes, for those of you that don't know those records, they were massive. Absolutely massive. Millions of records sold. So it was a pleasure for me to sit down and talk to him about that era and also find out about the early days of spending time with Jim. I hope you enjoyed it. The next episode, episode 4, is going to be with Sean and Matt from While She Sleeps. Remember, you can check out all things excellent on marshall.com, and I can be found on various social media sites. It's just my name, @Daniel P. Carter. Thank you for listening. I am out. Peace.